Ezra Bridger, SHIN HATI, and BAYLAN SKOLL, 3 characters with destinies shrouded in mystery. But what if their fates are more intertwined than we thought? What if their connections run deeper, tied to the very root of Star Wars lore and even Norse mythology? What if everything we thought we knew about Ezra, Shin, and BAYLAN was just the surface of a much deeper story? Younglings, welcome back to another exploration for this very special video. It's going to dive into the vast darkness and the annals of Star Wars history. With the information we have on our heroes and villains, it's time to speculate on theories that could completely change how we think about Star Wars as a whole, and what might be happening to these characters in the future. Before we go any further, I have a few questions for you to ponder as we embark on our next journey together. How likely is it that Shin and BAYLAN are not only connected to each other, but also linked to Ezra and their destiny? In fact, could there be another X factor beyond the MORTIS gods that all 3 of them are connected to? And just how closely do our characters align with the gods from other ancient stories, both inside and outside the Star Wars galaxy? Well, I hope you're ready to explore some of these questions with me today. And even if we're not able to reach a conclusion on all of them, let's embark together on discovering the unknown and learning more about Ezra and his companions. So, without further ado, in today's exploration, we'll be taking a look at Ezra's special connection to SHIN HATI and BAYLAN SKOLL, and what this means for their roads ahead. If you've been around the Star Wars Infinite channel, you may have seen a few lengthy videos and shorts about BAYLAN and Shin. They are topics I'm fascinated by because I think they represent new avenues not yet explored in Star Wars. In some of those videos I delved, or at least scratched the surface, into the Norse myths. If you haven't already watched those videos, I've linked them above so you can get full context to this theory as well. But for the purposes of this video, Shin and BAYLAN are both inspired by 2 Norse wolves that chase the Rapture. Their story, well, it's cyclical. They don't chase together, but instead pursue different things while always following one another. Think of them as a clock, with 2 identical hands on opposite sides of the clock itself. They never truly meet, yet they run the same race in an eternal circle. And as I made those videos, I was very much focused on the concept of only those 2 characters having Norse influence, but as I stepped back and thought to myself, I realized that the wolves run in packs, and they're probably more nearby, somewhere else. This led me to examine Ezra Bridger more closely. Now, a little context on Ezra Bridger. Ezra Bridger was born in Lothal, as we all know, and while that doesn't seem significant, his life there intersects deeply with the Force. You see, in my opinion, just like the Norse wolves, just like the influences on BAYLAN and Shin, I think the Force is actually cyclical, and it's alive.
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
It moves and responds to things, and I firmly believe that the planet Lothal is a Force-sensitive one. Now stick with me here because this all is relevant moving forward in our theory. Lothal is home to a precious material called Dume, which was a primary resource in the construction of the Death Star. In essence, the planet, at the hands of multiple companies run by politicians and business people from Coruscant, as well as domestic companies like ones run by the Price family, is essentially victimized by the complete stripping of its land, with no fair deal and a place at that time for the people who always lived there. At the same time, and unbeknownst to many, Lothal also housed ancient Jedi temples. It's around this time, pre-Death Star era, that the Force awakens there, no pun intended. Ezra Bridger is born, and the wheels of fate truly begin to turn. Lothal, in my opinion, and the Force respond to the tipping of the scales by Palpatine and the Empire by producing anomalies like Ezra, the Jedi temples that lay before our heroes on Lothal, and even things like the World Between Worlds, which also take place there. When Ezra and Kanan venture into the temple, Ezra not only encounters Yoda in what appears to be the World Between Worlds, but Kanan faces trials with ancient temple guards, and Ezra meets Palpatine, or at least sees him at a glance for the first time in different forms. In addition to this, Ezra discovers the World Between Worlds, like we just mentioned, through the ancient ruins on Lothal as well.
Luminous beings are we, not this fruit catcher. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
The Force is what gives the Jedi its power. It's an energy created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
And after his master Kanan Jarrus dies, something even more important happens. Remember when I said the Force responds? It seeks to balance the scales? Well, the scales tip too far, and the Force works even harder to restore that balance. One way the Force acted, in my opinion, was through the appearance of Dume, who was essentially the embodiment of a recently passed away Kanan Jarrus.
Dume. That was my master's name.
It's not merely coincidence that the wolf Dume is a Lothal wolf and is in a wolf form. There's a reason for that symbolism, in my humble opinion. If SHIN HATI and BAYLAN SKOLL are the wolves that chase the sun and the moon in Norse mythology, then who is Kanan closest to in that same mythos? Unlike Shin and BAYLAN, who have more direct links, Kanan's connection is more of a borrowing from one in particular, though he is entirely, in a way, still his own person and character. Now stick with me here, I know it sounds a little bit confusing. Kanan Jarrus is most closely linked to Odin from the Norse mythos in several ways. The first comes through sacrifice. Odin from the Norse mythos is known for having sacrificed his eye for wisdom. Now Kanan, while not sacrificing for wisdom, he learns his way to wisdom, following a different path. Kanan is a Jedi Knight in the first half of Star Wars Rebels, but in my opinion, his true trial begins when he loses his sight after Darth Maul slashes his eyes. Though Kanan is blind now, he undergoes many personal trials and lessons, and during that time he struggles with all things Jedi should leave behind: anger, sadness, discovering a sense of self, and learns how to operate without his most important tool, his sight. Like a true master, he learns to see in other ways and also gains wisdom through the Force itself, particularly through its manifestation in the Bendu. Now keep that in mind. Odin gives up his eyes for wisdom. Kanan loses his eyes and learns his way to true wisdom. Now, like we just discussed, these lessons that Kanan learns, well, they lead him to gain a wisdom that he needs. And we see that his arc is complete when he sacrifices himself for his friends, truly making him the Jedi Master he was meant to become. In learning to let go of the hubris and arrogance of relying solely on his sight, Kanan was able to relearn how to see. However, it wasn't the regaining of his eyesight that made him a master. It was the completion of his training, and the realization that self-sacrifice for those you care about is the greatest act one can perform. His journey of training and growth culminates in this moment of truth and selflessness as he sacrifices his own life. Secondly, Kanan and Odin also share similarities in their shapeshifting ability. Kanan returns in spirit as Dume, and Odin too is known to appear to others in human forms, which differ from his usual guide-like presence and also in animalistic forms. One form in particular stands out as it relates to the similarities between the two. In the Norse myths, Odin's magic is often credited with giving warriors berserker strength. People believe this to be a blessing from Odin, and the text often describe these warriors as having the ferocity of bears, and as well, wolves. So Kanan, as we all know, turns into Dume, or is at least speculated to be so, and is much more direct than Odin. He nudges Ezra in the right direction. And in my opinion, he also completes Ezra's training to the best of his ability, now as Dume. Now, we've been talking a lot about Kanan, and I know this is an Ezra theory, but it's irrelevant because Kanan essentially segues into Ezra in many ways, master into apprentice. So now we have to ask ourselves, at the conclusion of this training with the Dume Wolf, is Ezra a Jedi Knight at the conclusion? Do Ezra and Kanan meet again on Peridia for more training? Or is it time for Ezra to move forward onto a new master? Those particular questions, well, they'd make a great story for another time. So for now, let's move on with today's theory, connecting Ezra, Shin, and Baylan.
When you understand that and the Force is everywhere, you know then that there is always a balance in nature. So the wolves have this duality where they are kind of both dark and light. Our agency to use the Force for ourselves creates evil and the dark side as something to be oppressive and destructive rather than just the natural process of life and death. I mean, this is nothing new that I'm doing. It's really in there. What I did was I brought nature into it more. Ezra's connection to Lothal and these animals that are from his planet, you know, it's like having a hometown advantage. So he just gets along with them because he's from there and they know that. But when he's afraid, the wolves certainly aren't nice to him because they're like, you're wasting our time, buddy. And so they have to be both things.
So now that I've outlined two specific ways Kanan mirrors Odin, I think we can at least speculate that Kanan's character, more specifically the wolf, is another example of Dave Filoni's influence on our entire overarching theme. I think in nature you eventually come to question, where does this leave Ezra? Given Ezra's deep relationships with Kanan, and in a sense with the Odin-like figure of Star Wars, or at least a piece of Odin, what role does Ezra play in the story? Who is he most represented by? And what relationships does that leave Ezra with, especially when it comes to Shin and Baylan? Most notably, as it pertains to Ezra Bridger, his strongest connection to all three of these characters comes through his bond with animals. In the Star Wars mythos, some Jedi have a special connection to the Force. Cal Kestis can touch objects and feel their past. Jason Syndulla seems to have a knack to hear from the Force. And in Ezra's case, he has a deep connection with the environment around him, a very grounded piece of nature. As we all know, the Force binds all things, and it flows through everything. And this is especially evident in the environment around us. One of the most abundant parts of nature in Star Wars, much like our own world, is not just the environment, but the wildlife that makes up entire ecosystem. Ezra has a very strong, grounded connection to the Force, which plays a key role in these relationships between himself, animals, and the environment. In my theory, I think Ezra will undoubtedly have a connection with Shin and Baylan on these grounds, or at least reconnect with Kanan for one final lesson. The main reason is I think this is due to the relationship with the nature I mentioned. Before we continue, let's take a look at some specific moments where Ezra connected with nature and found a way to work with it using his will. Now keep in mind, though this theory discusses nature in the physical sense and ties into the Norse myths that inspired Shin and Baylan, Ezra's connection to nature and the Force goes much deeper than these animalistic instincts we've been discussing. And our first example comes from the world between worlds, which was hinted at early in Ezra's life, specifically when visiting the Lothal Temple in Star Wars Rebels Season 1.
I know this place.
Special duties?
Last time I couldn't see you.
Growing your abilities are, and with them, danger. A long time fought I did, consumed by fear I was. Though see it I did not.
You were afraid?
Yes, afraid. Surprised, are you? A challenge lifelong it is, not to bend fear into anger.
What's happening?
Found you, the enemy has.
Ezra is able to communicate with Yoda in what would later be known as the world between worlds. Now, whether this was initiated by Yoda, Ezra, Lothal, or the Force at large doesn't really matter. The first instance, it simply highlights that there's a certain connection between all of them. Luke and Yoda famously refer to the Force as a living entity, the energy that surrounds us, binds us together, and fills all life. As such, the Force is literally nature, as it is the essence of nature itself. And Ezra's special visits to the world between worlds shows that his connection to the Force is so profound that he's able to delve between time and space, communing with the Force in a way very few can, perhaps only even him. In theory, when Ahsoka visits the world between worlds, she is presumed to be dead during that time, as she later alludes to choosing to live. Furthermore, when Ezra pulls Ahsoka into the world between worlds, she is again facing death, or perhaps should have faced it, which might have caused a glitch in the system, so to speak, allowing her to transcend. Ahsoka in a sense has already died, and was revived by the Mortis gods, the embodiment of the daughter, making her somewhat immortal. But back to the point here of Ezra. When Ezra enters the world between worlds, he is alive, making this a notable feat, especially considering he's just a human. So how do we tie this to Baylan and Shin, at least through the Norse inspirations? Ezra's connections come through animals, which is shown time and time again, and as we've mentioned several times already. His first encounter with animals and the Force is key to understanding how he might interact with Shin and Baylan. As Shin and Baylan are clearly adversarial, it's important to recall that the episode titled A Call to Action from Star Wars Rebels, because in this episode Ezra uses the Force to calm a group of Freenoks, dangerous predatory creatures, convincing them to attack the Imperials instead of himself. Now this is important because not only does he turn his enemies into allies, but he also reasons with the creatures to protect him. So let's take this one step further and look at Star Wars Rebels Season 2 and the episode titled The Call. In this episode, Ezra goes even deeper into his skill set and communes with the Purrgil. Remember those large space-like whales that take Ahsoka to Peridea. For those unfamiliar, Purrgil are large space whales that roam the deep recesses of space, traveling to places no one has ever been to in a millennia. In this episode, Ezra communes with the Purrgil in a manner similar to Ahsoka but on a deeper level as he understands their motivations, instincts, and lives.
These creatures are amazing. Who would want to shoot them?
Hera, if you gave her the chance.
Kanan, you don't know what you're talking about. I do.
Well, since I'm so uneducated, why don't you explain your problem?
These creatures are a menace, a big lumbering menace.
Something's upsetting it.
Maybe it's Hera.
Here we see Ezra not only manipulating the creatures, but having a dialogue with them, creating an understanding. And there are more examples as well, such as in Star Wars Rebels Season 3 Episode 7, where Ezra calms a group of spiders, solidifying his connection to the Force through animals. And it's no mere coincidence that he's mastering this skill. All this culminates in something even more special, following the passing of Kanan Jarrus. So you ask how? Well, Kanan's death is symbolic in a lot of ways. It shows that Kanan has completed his trials like we talked about, and learned the most important lessons concerning fatherhood and self-sacrifice. But beyond that, Kanan is able to revisit Ezra in another way, through the spirit of the Lothal wolf. And this is where Ezra's abilities become very important, because his relationship with the Force and the nature on Lothal allows him to be receptive to this version of Kanan. Now, we had a whole blurb before about Dume, Kanan, and how he trains Ezra. But could we speculate that Ezra would have had a connection to Shin or Baylan should their paths cross? After all, Dume, Kanan, Shin, and Baylan are all represented by wolves, and this is not a coincidence. So how exactly would this play out, and what role would Ezra have specifically amongst the pack? Before we mention how Odin was closely related to Kanan in some ways, but in essence, being that Kanan is Ezra's master and imparted many lessons to him, one would have to wonder if Ezra is a part of Odin too. Now, as we mentioned before, Shin and Baylan have direct ties to Norse influence. And while they do have these direct ties, Ezra and Kanan have ties as well, but they aren't as direct, so this is where our theory truly comes into play. So for that purpose, I think it's important to consider Ezra's abilities. I've mentioned his ability to speak with nature and commune on a deeper level, as hinted in the world between worlds and tying him into the Norse mythos, or at least a search for clues. The greatest clue I could find as it pertains to Ezra in the Norse mythos is the character of Baldur. For context, Baldur is the son of Odin. Now, we alluded to Kanan being an Odin-like figure, and in a sense Ezra is more like a son to Kanan, or at least a younger brother. In the Norse mythos, Baldur is considered to be the most beautiful and pure of the gods, and based on what I could find about Baldur, Baldur's presence amongst the gods inspired peace and friendship, which certainly highlights one of Ezra's abilities as well. All the times we see Ezra in Rebels, most of the time, his heart is gold. He leans on helping people, making people smile, and being a good friend. Very Baldur-like. And back to the Norse angle, this is where things become more uncanny. Baldur dies during Ragnarok. Now, as we all know, Shin and Baylan are essentially chasing Ragnarok in a way, or at least Baylan certainly is, trying to hit that hard reset on the galaxy itself. However, Ragnarok can be subjective at concept. It could represent a major event in one's life, perhaps the death of a close family member or the loss of something great. For Ezra, the Ragnarok comes when he sacrifices himself, I think in theory, sending himself and Thrawn into the deep reaches of space at the end of Star Wars Rebels.
I have to see this through to the end. And remember, the Force will be with you, always.
This not only saves his friends, but it saves Lothal and is instrumental in the fall of the Empire and the dawn of the New Republic. Again, his own personal Ragnarok. But how does this tie Ezra to Balder even further in the Norse mythos? Well, when Balder dies, it sets the stage for a time of renewal. While Balder is prophesied to return, one could argue that Ezra could too. And this is alluded to in the painting on Lothal and in Sabine's Force connection, her faith never allowing her to lose hope.
Ezra?
Hi, Hera. I'm home.
Ezra's return in Ahsoka, after many years of exile on Peridia, mirrors the idea of renewal and the cyclical nature of hope. When Ezra returns to the known galaxy, it is transformative for our heroes, and that it shows resilience, hope, and a new beginning despite the losses on the road that got themselves there. This could hint that Ezra's return might serve as a light that shines on Shin Hati and Baylan Skoll, trying to pull them toward the light or divert them from their path.
Do you miss it? The Order.
I miss the idea of it. But not the truth. The weakness. There was no future there.
You clearly see one here? In this wasteland?
Now, while Dave Filoni has certainly hinted that Baylan is on his way to Ragnarok, Shin has arguably already been pulled off this path, and Baylan chooses to go his own way. This leads me to speculate that Ezra could somehow intervene or attempt to help Shin, and possibly Baylan down the line if he's receptive to the idea. Remember, Baylan does have that one notorious line, missing the idea of the Jedi. Now, as for my theory on when that will happen, I think we could follow a narrative where Ezra serves as the light. Now, whether Ezra lives to lead these foes to the light is up for speculation. In the mythos, Balder does die, and so could Ezra die again. Though I doubt that would really be the case, I think that Ezra is going to be instrumental and probably more likely in inspiring the New Republic to heed the warnings of Hera Syndulla, that Thrawn is certainly a much larger threat than they previously thought. But in sum, there you have it. This is how I think Ezra will truly share a deep connection to Baylan, Shin Hati, Ragnarok, and the Star Wars universe going forward. It's where he truly fits into the puzzle. And while it may seem like his character is simply inspired by the great Norse mythos, the connections here are far more profound than they actually appear. You just have to read a little bit deeper between the lines. Ezra's ability to communicate with animals, to transcend the boundaries of time and space in the world between worlds, and to embodify a purity akin to Balder. These aren't coincidences, they're there on purpose. They're symbolic of something far greater, and something that ties him into the larger narrative at play. By representing light, hope, and renewal, core qualities of the Jedi, and also the qualities that echo in Balder's role, his selflessness, his deep connections to nature, and his role in restoring balance all mirrors the myths surrounding Baldur's deaths and prophesized return. And like we kind of already argued, Ezra's already had a death in the way, and he's already returned too, as it was prophesized by these murals. And perhaps maybe Ezra is already really gone, but he's just tapped into something we're not familiar with all his time on Peridia. After all, he does have a deep connection to the world between worlds. What's really fascinating is that Ezra's return could signify more than just restoration of hope for the heroes we know. It could be the catalyst that pulls Baylan and Shin away from their destructive paths, their ascent to their own Ragnarok. While Dave Filoni has hinted that Baylan is heading towards his own personal Ragnarok, it's possible that Ezra is going to intervene, as we've just discussed and speculated on for the last 20 or so minutes. Could Ezra's connection to the Force and nature be the way that these ancient myths are guided towards the light? And what's next for Ezra after this? Is he truly the beacon of hope, or is he destined to make the ultimate sacrifice like Baldur did? Could his return be a pivotal moment that shifts the balance of power in the galaxy? Or is he merely a character loosely inspired by the Norse mythos, and his role in the saga isn't as grand as we think? I highly doubt that, and I think Ezra has a tremendous path ahead. But these questions remain to be answered, and that's why I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Ezra Bridger's connection to SHIN HATI, BAYLAN SKOLL, and the Norse mythos? Could his bond with these ancient stories play a role in determining his fate? And does it set him up for a sacrifice? Or will his connections to human myths like the Norse mythos and the internal myths in Star Wars like the World Between World make him a transformative force in the galaxy? Guys, this was truly a special edition of a Star Wars theory, so let me know your theories in the comments below. And remember, sometimes all it takes is a little digging to uncover the truth that's been hidden in plain sight for so long. Until next time, my friends, stay safe, and may the Force be with you, always.